In this video, we're going to talk about slivers and Flutter. So if we look at the documentation here, we'll see that slivers are a portion of a scrollable area. We'll be focusing on sliver list, sliver grid, and SliverAppBar. So if we go back to our app here, I created a very basic app that we have here for our main. We just have our basic run app with our my app here. And I created a screen called a query form screen. So if you go to the query form screen here, we can see that it's a stateful widget with a query form screen state. We have a form key. So if you're not familiar with forms, please look at my video that I created on how to use forms in Flutter. They're pretty easy. So we have our form key here, and we have a name list as our state. And I have a test entry here for the array. And we have let's go down here first to the build. We have a scaffold container, and we have our form here with a column. And in our column, we have a text with a build name field function, which all that does is it creates the text form field. And we have our validator for the name and onSaved, which just adds a new value to our name list here. If you have done forms before, then this should look pretty familiar. So we also have a submit function here, which validates our form. And if that's okay, then we go ahead and we save our form state here. So I'm also printing out the value of the name list. So let's add something here. Let's add cookie, and we'll add burger. So you can see here that we are adding one entry to the list every time we press submit. So this is working fine. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to go up here. I'm going to add a new function. I'm going to say widget. I'm going to say build list widget. And then I'm going to pass in a color. And I think I want to pass in a text too. So we're going to do string text. And then we'll return a container. And we're going to have a color for our container, which will be the color. And we're going to have a child that is centered. So we're going to have a center here. And for this center, the child will be a text. I'm going to pass in the text, the string text. And we're going to have some styling for our text here. So we're going to have style, text style. And then we're going to set the color of the text, I guess white, because we're going to have a dark background. So colors.white. And we're going to have a font size. Let's set it to something big like 48. So we have this build list widget. And you'll see why I created this here in a second. So if you go down to our build here, the first thing that we want to do is create a scroll view for our slivers. Slivers have to be wrapped inside of a scroll view of some sort. So we're just going to use an actual scroll view. The scaffold stays here, but instead of the normal container, we are going to have a scroll view. There's a class in Flutter called custom scroll view. If I can spell custom scroll view. And we can get rid of the margin here. So I'm going to cut out some of this code and save it for later, so we don't have to retype it. So I'm just going to paste it down here and comment it out. So let's go back up here to our form, and we can actually get rid of this entire block here with the form. So instead of our custom scroll view, there's a option called slivers. You can see here it says slivers. The slivers to place inside the viewport. So our entire scaffold is going to contain a few slivers. We'll put slivers here, and the slivers option here takes in an array of widgets. We're going to have different sliver widgets here. So the first widget that we want to add here is called a SliverAppBar. And this will be similar to the normal app bar that you create, but it's for slivers. Let's first add a title. There's a lot of different options here. You just have to play around with this to see what there is for each of the sliver widgets. So for the title, we're just going to have a text. You've seen this before, and we'll just call it coding with curry. And we're also going to have a background color. So let's do colors dot, let's do deep purple. And now we can set a height. So the SliverAppBar can expand and contract based on different options that you provided. So one of the options for that is called expanded height. And I'm going to set it to 200. So this is the height of the app bar when it's fully expanded. Next, there's an option called flexible space. So you can see here, the widget is stacked behind the toolbar and the tab bar. Its height will be the same as the app bar's overall height. So for flexible space, we want to pass in something called a flexible app bar. Flexible space bar, I mean. So flexible space bar, part of the material design that expands and collapses. So for this widget, we want to add a background. I want to show something in the background when it's fully expanded. Let's actually just save and reload this to see what we have now. So this is what we have now. This is the expanded app bar with coding with curry and height 200. If we scroll up and down, we can see that it contracts and expands, but you can't really see the full extent of what this SliverAppBar can do until we add more widgets later. But for now, you can just see it expanding and contracting. So for the flexible spacebar, you can put in a widget that you want to have showing in this entire expanded view. I want to add in an image, and I want to add in a background. And for the background, this could be anything, but we're going to have an image. We're going to have it coming from the network. So image.network, and then you supply the URL here. So I actually already have a link that I want to show here. I like curry, so I'm going to paste in this link for some Thai curry. And let's save and reload. And now you can see the picture here. It goes away when we contract the app bar, and it comes back when we expand it. But you can see it doesn't take up the entire app bar here. So let's put in an option for the fit. So fit determines how the image will fit into the surrounding container. So let's do fit, and fit takes in a box fit. So we want to do box fit, and then you can choose one of these here. I'm going to do cover, so it takes up all of the space. I've got the comma here. And then let's reload. And now you can see that we have our image in our app bar as we expand and contract. Okay, so now that we have that, let's add another sliver. Let's do sliver fixed extended list, extent list. So if you want to know more about this, you can read about that here. It places multiple box children with the same main axis extent into a linear array. So that's a fancy way of saying that it just places the widget children in a fixed array on the screen. Let's see what the options are here. We have something called item extent, the extent that children are forced to have in the main axis. So the extent in our case means the height. Just keep that in mind. We're going to say 150 here. And then let's go down here, and there's an option called delegate. So the delegate represents the actual widgets on the screen that will be inside of this list. So we want to put delegate here, and then we have some options here. We're going to do sliver child list delegate. So you can see here, this is a delegate that supplies children for slivers using an explicit list. This is just a list of widgets that you want to provide for this delegate that fits into this list. This might seem a bit confusing, but it's just things that you have to remember. Once you do this a few times, it'll be pretty quick and you won't really have to think about it. So let's do this. And then we want to put in our array here. So we're passing in an array of widgets to this sliver child list delegate. So I'm going to copy this here. This is why we built this function. So we don't have to create this container here like 5 or 6 different times. So let's put in a bunch of these here. Actually, first let's define what these are. So we'll do colors.purple. And the text here, I want to be just a random food. Let's do curry. And then I'm going to copy this a lot of times here. And then we'll do something like rice, let's do pizza, random foods, hamburger, noodles, let's do some eggs, maybe some salad. Okay, you can see why creating a separate function for this makes your code a lot more readable. So let's alternate the colors here so you can see the item extent value here with the list. So we'll do blue, here, and then we'll do blue here and blue here. Okay, so let's reload this and see what we have. And ta-da, we have a list of foods here. And as we scroll up, we see that our app bar goes away at a certain point if we keep scrolling up. So there's different options that you could put for your app bar. You could have it pinned. So if it gets up to here, it'll just stay here as you scroll up. But we don't have that option set with our app bar here. There's a lot of different things that you can do with these different sliver widgets here, but I wanted to show you the very basics of what these allow you to do. I want to create a separate file now. I want to create a file called curry, actually lowercase, curry sliver header .dart. So I'm just doing this to show you different ways of separating your code into different files, which comes in handy as your apps grow big. So for this file here, we're going to create a class. It'll be curry sliver header, and this will extend stateless widget. So this is just a stateless widget here. We'll have a constructor here. Let's create the actual values that we'll need. I'm going to do final color, background color, and final string header title. So similar to what we had in the previous form screen with these list widgets here. Okay, and then we're going to pass in these to the constructor. So you do that by saying this dot background color and this dot header title. Okay, let's just import or add our build here. We're going to return something called a sliver persistent header. And before I go further, the goal is to create headers for our screen here that are sticky. So we're going to create sticky headers, which is something that you see a lot in different apps. And I wanted to kind of create that to show you how easy it is in Flutter. So we have sliver persistent header. We have a lot of different options here, but we're going to use one called pinned, and we're going to set it to true. And we're also going to use one called floating. So floating is whether the header should grow again if the user scrolls, or if the user reverses scroll direction. Floating false. And we also need a delegate here too. So you can see that it's of type sliver persistent header delegate. So delegate. And the thing about this class here is that this class is abstract. So if you're familiar with object-oriented programming, you cannot instantiate abstract classes. So we need to create a separate class that extends sliver persistent header delegate. So we'll come back to this in a second. Let's first go down here and create the new class that we want to put here. So we're going to do class. I want to call it, just call it delegate, I guess, and extends. And we're going to extend that class that we saw here. Let's just put that here. Actually, this should be outside of this. Okay, and let's implement the overrides here. Okay, and now I'm going to, before we mess with this here, I'm going to add that here. So we're going to have delegate here. So you can see there's no errors here now. So for the delegate, if you look inside here, you can see that it's abstract. So that's why we cannot just create a new instance of this here. The build here is the widget that you want to show on the screen. Get rid of this comment. And let's do a container. And we're going to add a background color like before. But before we do that, I forgot we need to add in our background color and header title here. So we're passing this around a bit, which is fine because this is only used in this class. So we're going to have the same values here. And then we're going to copy and paste this to, let's call it delegate. So we're passing the background color and title to curry sliver header. And then we need to pass it to the delegate here. So we're going to do background color and header title here. Okay. And now for our color here, we can add our background color. Okay, so we have our color, and now we want to add in our child, which will be centered. So we want to do center. And for the child, we're going to do text, and we have our header title here. So we're going to pass in our header title, and then we're going to do some styling here again. So let's do style, text style, and we're going to do color, Let's do colors dot white again, font size, and let's say something smaller. So 36 would be nice. So we have our centered text here instead of our persistent header. Okay, so now let's talk about these here. Max extent, min extent. Remember, extent is kind of just the size of the widget. So it's the height in our case. We're gonna set the maximum to 150 and the min to something like 60. So 150 is the expanded height and 60 is the minimum height. Should rebuild. This one I don't really mess with a lot. You can play around with this if you want to, but I usually just set it to true. So I'm going to return true. And that is it for our curry silver header here. So we're passing in the background color and header. And I created this file to make our form screen less polluted with redundant code. So let's go back to our form screen here. And we're going to put these above the sliver fixed extent list. So we're going to say curry sliver header. And we're going to pass in some colors. We're going to say colors. Let's do purple. So colors.purple. And we're going to pass in, let's just say header 1. And let's put a second one here just for fun. Header 2. And let's make this one, I want it a different shade. So let's do deep purple here. Okay, so now as you can see, we have our slivers here. We have SliverAppBar. We have sliver header or sliver persistent headers here. And we have sliver fixed extent list. So let's save and reload this. So now let's look at our header here. So let's scroll up, see what happens. Scrolling up, scrolling up, scrolling up. You see that we have our headers being stuck to the top here. So this is a great way to create sticky headers for your list. It's extremely easy in Flutter. Like Google is doing some really amazing things with the UI in Flutter and making things extremely easy. So yeah, that covers these 3 things. There's a few other things that I can talk about. For example, you see we have sliver fixed extent list. So let's say that we don't want these to be fixed heights. We want different heights. Then we would want to use a normal sliver list. So we would do sliver list. And then we would take out this item extent here. So let's save, reload. And as you see here, now our height is not fixed. So actually our height of each of these list widgets here is dependent upon the actual content. So for example, let's say I take out one of these here and I change the container. So let's put the container down here. I want to put that here. Colors.green, and I want to have text here that says larger text. And then I want to change this font size to something like 72. So let's do 72. Actually, let's put this one in between a couple other ones. So let's do this and put it below here. And let's reload. And now you can see that this widget here has a bigger height than the rest of these because it has larger content. So if you want to have more of a variable list height, then just use a normal sliver list. So if I go back to sliver list or sliver fixed extent list, and then I add back in our item extent, and then I say something like 150, and then I reload, you can see the difference here. But if I make this text like way large, like 200, then you can see that it goes outside of the bounds of the height. And if I change this back to sliver list and get rid of this, you can see that it fits the height. So that's something to keep in mind. If you know that all of your list items are going to be the same height and the same content, then just use an extent list. If not, use a sliver list. So there's one more thing that I want to go over in this video. I want to go over the sliver grid. The sliver grid lets you space out a grid of widgets. So let's go down here to our extent list, and Let's create a new one and let's call it sliver list. So we're going to have a separate list here. And inside of here, we're going to have a delegate. So this delegate is of type sliver child delegate. And here we can specify a Flutter class called sliver child list delegate. So it's a delegate that supplies children for slivers using an explicit list. And this is a function that takes in an array. So we want to put a container in here first. And the container will have a margin. I'm going to say maybe, let's do edge insets all. And let's do 24 for the margin. And then for the child here, we're going to have our form. So remember, I commented out the form and put it down here. Let's uncomment it out and put it back up here. So let's put it into our child here. Okay, so we now have our form with the build name field function, which just creates the text form field, as you can see here. So let's go back down here, look at the errors real quick, put the comma here. Okay, and let's just look at this first. So let's restart. And if we go down here, you can see that our form is still back here. So this looks as we expect it to look now. So let's go back down here to our sliver list. And we're going to add another sliver widget after this. We are going to add the sliver grid. And the sliver grid takes in a couple of different arguments that we need. We need first a grid delegate. And the grid delegate, as you can see here, it controls the size and position of the children. So it's of type silver grid delegate, but we're going to use a specific type. We're going to use something called a sliver grid delegate with fixed axis cross count, or with fixed cross axis count. First, it takes in cross axis count. So this is the number of items going across the grid horizontally. So we want to have, in our case, I want to set it to 3. And then you do the spacing. So main axis spacing, we want to do something like 8, and cross axis is, we could set 8 too. So it'll be 8 spacing horizontally and vertically, and 3 items across. Okay, so we have that now. So now we need to specify another one, and that'll be the normal delegate that's common to all of the other sliver widgets. So the delegate is of silver child delegate. And for this one, we can add another specific widget. I want to add something called a sliver child builder delegate. So if you look at this class, it's a delegate that supplies children for slivers using a builder callback. So you can read more about this here, but I'm just going to show you why we are using this here. It takes in a couple of different arguments here. It takes in a build context, call it context, and an index. So we're going to do int index, okay? And inside of here, we will return the actual widget that we'll use for each item in the grid. So we want to return a container. And for this container, we're going to have some padding. So I want to do something like maybe 8 or 10. So let's do edge insets all, and let's do 10. And I want to do a color for the background. So let's do color. To be consistent, I'm going to use deep purple. Okay, and for the child, we're going to have it centered. So I want to do center. And for this child, I want to do a text. And for the text, I want to have just the name of the actual thing that we put here in the input. For the text, I want to have name, list, index. So remember that we're putting an item into the array every time we press the submit button. So we are just taking that name and we are showing it inside of each of the grid items in the sliver grid here. Okay, so now let's add in some styling. So let's do text, align, and I want to align it in the center. We'll do text align dot center. Let's add in some more styling. Let's do style. And I want to do text style. Oops. Text style. And I want to do color. And for the color, let's do white. Colors.white. So we'll have white on deep purple. And then for the font size, let's do 20. Okay, so let's save and reload. Okay, so let's check out our grid form. And as you can see, we're getting some errors here. So the reason why we're getting these errors is because we did not define the actual length of the grid list here. So in order for this to work correctly, we need to add in the child count to the sliver grid. So let's go down here to the sliver grid, and right here, we need to add in the child count. And the child count will just be the length of the list. So we do name list dot length. Do not forget the length of the child or the child count. Let's save and let's reload. Okay, so now let's go down to our grid here and see what we have. We have our test item here, which is part of our default value in our name list. So let's add a new item here. I'm just going to type in something random, press submit, and you can see that it was added to our grid and verified here in the logs. So we can keep adding more things to the list here. So yeah, you can see how our spacing is set out here. It's always 3 across and 8 spacing here, 8 spacing here. So that concludes slivers in Flutter. So we walked through the SliverAppBar. We talked about the sliver header here in this file. So we have the sliver persistent header delegate, and we have the sliver fixed extent list for objects of a fixed height. And we have the sliver list, which lets you put slivers of different heights in your list. And we have a sliver grid, which helps you arrange your slivers in a grid-like fashion here. So I hope this helps you get started with slivers. There's a lot more that you can play around with. Look at the documentation for more information. Stay tuned for more videos, and happy coding.